They did an incredible job. We're so blessed with people to put on these dramas to help our kids see something that really happened, experience something that really happened. And this story is true, and we see in this story that God enjoyed a perfect relationship with Adam and Eve. And it was very good. And part of what made that relationship very good, part of what made it perfect, was that it involved trust and it involved freedom. And the tragic part of this story is that when the serpent suggested to Eve that God was a liar, she was presented with a choice. She could choose to trust the God who loved her, who made her, who wanted to be with her, or she could choose to trust a snake. And when Adam was presented with this idea that God had lied to them, that he wasn't who he said he was, instead of listening to God's voice, Adam listened to Eve. And in that moment, they essentially said to God, "We're doing things our way. We believe you're keeping something from us." And in that moment, because God is not a liar, and he told them that if they did that, they would die, death happened instantly. And it was confusing for them because they didn't die physically right in that moment. That came later. But in that very moment, they experienced a death within them that made it so that their eyes and their ears and their hearts were broken. And just like a dead person's eyes don't work anymore, they couldn't see the world the way God wanted them to see it anymore. And just like a dead person's ears don't work anymore, they could no longer hear all of the things that God wanted to say to them. And their hearts were broken, so they could no longer be with him. And if that wasn't bad enough, this death had become such a part of who they were that they passed it on to every single person who was born after them. So that every single person who was born after Adam and Eve was born with broken eyes and broken ears and a broken heart. And that brokenness leads these people, us, to do things that are not very good, that separate us from God. And to help the kids understand this, I showed them the metaphor of a door. I said, the rest of our life, because of this brokenness, we spend our days searching for new life. And it's like that new life is separated from us by a huge door with a big lock, and we keep jamming different keys in that lock to try to get it open so that we can experience new life, so that we can fix the brokenness. This key right here represents when I tried friendship to get new life. I thought if I had a lot of friends, then maybe surely I would feel alive. And I had some really cool friends. They were really fun. But no matter how many friends I had, I still felt lonely inside. This key right here represents when I thought if I was really pretty or really smart or really impressive, if I got people to think I was really cool, surely that would give me new life. But that didn't work. This key right here represents when I thought if I could travel the whole world and see all kinds of exciting things and have all kinds of amazing experiences, surely then I would have new life. But it didn't work. This key represents when I thought if I could just become a good person, if I could just do all the right things, if I could be disciplined and make sure that I put all my effort into doing good, surely that would bring me good and new life. But no matter how many good things I tried to do, managed to do, it didn't work. Now I'm wearing a key around my neck, and that's because this key represents something very special. This key represents what worked, what opened the door to new life. It represents a person whose name is Jesus. I loved telling the kids a truth about God, that he is never afraid. He never lies, and he is never afraid. And this problem that Adam and Eve created, that we have created, separating us from him, does not scare him because he has an incredible plan to make it better, to restore that perfect relationship. He sent his son to become that very death that is within us so that he could conquer it once and for all. He died on a cross so that we could have new life, and he rose to life and invites us to rise to life with him. And just like Adam and Eve's perfect relationship required trust and freedom, so does ours. And Jesus has done this for us, but he demands a response. He demands a decision to say, I trust you, God. I believe you are who you say you are, and I want to be with you, just like you want to be with me. And I rejoice because so many kids this week made that decision. They made the decision to declare to the world that they trust in Jesus and in the power of what he did on the cross. And we are so excited about that. And we want to invite you this morning, if you are here and you don't have a church home yet, we would love to invite you to come and be a part of our family here at MAC. We know that raising a child is a really big job. And we would love to partner with you in any way we possibly can. So we want to invite you to come and to join us here in this community. Let's pray together. Dear Lord, I praise you so much that you made each one of us and that you love us and that you want to be with us. I pray that that truth would ring forward throughout the whole world. Father, we thank you for what you did through your Son, Jesus, that you conquered death once and for all, and for that all who trust in you, we can be with you again in a perfect relationship. Lord, I thank you and I praise you for that. Help us to understand the beauty of that truth in any way we possibly can. Thank you that you are risen, that you have conquered death. We love you, Lord. Amen.
You guys, I am so excited to be here with you today. I've been looking forward to this day for a while now. We're talking about something that's really important today. And I'd even argue that it's the most important thing we could be talking about. We're talking about how to grow closer to God. And that is incredibly important, especially if you've already decided that you want to have a relationship with him. Then figuring out what that means and how to grow in that area in your life is going to be so important. But if you are here today and you're maybe on the fence about whether or not God even exists, or if you want a relationship with him, this is not going to be a waste of your time. Because understanding what that looks like, if that's even possible, will be really helpful to you as you wrestle with those things. So we should all have buy-in to what we're talking about today. I think we all understand we long for relational closeness, and we realize it's not just a matter of proximity. You can be right next to somebody, right next to a friend, and feel like they're really far away. When I was growing up, and I learned for the first time that God is always with me, that everywhere I go, he's going to be there. It just so happened that around the same time, my parents were teaching me about modesty. And so one morning, my grandma came into my room, and she found me changing in my closet in the dark. And she was kind of perplexed, like, Jerilyn, what are you doing? I think we had to be somewhere, so I was taking a really long time. And I explained to her, I said, well, Grandma, let me tell you something. Grandma, God is a he. That's what we call him. And Mom has explained to me that it is not appropriate to be naked in front of a boy unless he is your husband or your doctor. And God is neither of those things for me. So I am changing in the dark because God is always with me, and I do not want him to see me naked. And my grandma, of course, explained to me that God was also an exception to that rule. But the reason I tell you guys that story this morning is because I wanted to illustrate the fact that kids are really good at doing the math on their beliefs. They're really good at making sure that what they think and what they believe all adds up. And I think that as adults, sometimes we lose the courage it takes to do that really carefully. And so this morning, I want us to be really brave, and I want us to ask some tough questions. Because doing the math on your relationship with God and what that looks like can be tricky. I was just mentioning that. How I've wrestled with why is it that the moment I make a decision to have a relationship with God, the moment I say, God, I want to know you, and I know you want to know me, why is it that happily ever after doesn't start in that moment? Why is it that I still go through periods of time where I struggle with things, periods of time where I struggle to hear his voice or to feel his presence? I want to see his face. Why can't that happen right away? And maybe you can think of reasons that wouldn't happen all the time. You know, we don't think that God is a jukebox. He's not like on demand for us. He's not a genie in a bottle where we just rub something the right way and he shows up to do whatever we want. So maybe you can think of reasons that God wouldn't show up all the time in terms of what you feel. But moments that I've really struggled with have been moments where I'm feeling a lot of pain, moments where I'm feeling very alone. And sometimes I've cried out to God in those moments, and it has felt like He hasn't shown up. It has felt like I'm still alone in that moment. And it seems like God should make an exception for that moment, whatever reasons He has for not showing up all the time. And you guys, I just want to pause for a moment and say, if any of you can relate to what I've just said, if any of you have experienced a moment like that, where you've cried out to God, and you've said, God, I long to feel your presence. I just need you to tell me everything is going to be okay. Please come. Please show up for me. And He hasn't shown up in that moment. I want to tell you something that I believe with conviction. And here it is. The fact that you didn't feel like God showed up in that moment doesn't mean that He wasn't there. He was there. And He was doing incredible work in your heart. And His work that was beautiful, and His work that is good. And I'm hoping by the end of today you won't just have to take my word for it, but do not give up on your relationship with God if you've had moments like that, because you felt the way you felt in that moment for a reason. You see, the expectation that the minute we say we want a relationship with God, that happily ever after is going to start in that very minute, that expectation is actually a bad one. And here's why. Relationships do not work that way. Relationships do not pop into existence. Relationships grow. You guys, the Bible talks about the moment you decide that you want a relationship with God. It describes that moment as being born again. And the reason that's such a beautiful and fitting description is because when we were born for the first time, we were born with eyes and ears and a heart that hopefully were working fine. But spiritually, our eyes and our ears and our hearts were born dead. They were born incapable of hearing spiritual things, incapable of feeling and sensing spiritual things. And when you make that decision to have a relationship with God, when you say, I want to put my trust in what Jesus has done for me, and I want to follow Him, I want to be a part of His family, those parts of you come to life for the first time. I just want us to think for a moment about the fact that that is really beautiful. That we're born spiritually as infants. And you guys, infants have a lot to learn. They have a lot to learn. Some of my dearest friends have recently had babies, and I could not be more excited for them. Yeah, cheer in the back. But I was thinking about them as I was preparing for today, and I was thinking about how crazy it would be if someone were to walk up to them and say, hey, if I snap my fingers right now, in this very moment, your child will instantly become a fully grown adult. She will know everything she needs to know. He will have all the habits he needs to have. Your job will essentially be done. What do you think? Oh, I can snap my fingers right now. Do you want to take me up on that deal? I cannot imagine a mom taking anyone up on that deal. Because moms want to be there for the process of watching their children grow. They want to be there when their child is taking their first steps. They want to be there to pick their child up after she falls off her bike and skins her knee. They want to process the rocky years of teenage life. They want to be there for all of those things. And at the end of it, they want to have this beautiful relationship with their child that has grown, that has developed. Moms are not just interested in their kids as this final product. You guys, God is not an exception to that. God is also somebody who, oh dear, something's happening. God is also somebody who is not just interested in you as a final product. He could snap his fingers and make you perfect in a moment if he wanted to. But there's a reason that he doesn't do that. And that reason is because he delights in walking through the process of growth with you. That's something that he delights in. I want to point out one thing that is really important, and it's the fact that that dynamic relationship that we long for, that happily ever after situation that we dream of in having with the Lord, that is something that is correlated with your spiritual maturity. So you're going to have a very different relationship with God as a spiritual infant and a spiritual adult. Recently, my mom and I got to have a dream come true. Like, all as I can remember growing up, we dreamed of going to Europe together. And this past January, it just so happened that my family got the opportunity to visit my sister, who's living in London right now. And for a portion of the trip, it was just me and my mom. And I learned some differences between us as travelers. So when I travel, I like to blend in. So I like to look like a local, I like to meet local people, and I like to find the secret hidden spots that only the locals know about, and I don't know, hipster in that way. But my mom, she fully embraces the identity of a tourist. So she has no shame in demonstrating that she's a tourist. She doesn't care about standing out, and she wants to see the things that the whole world has already decided are the best. She wants to see the touristy things, which makes sense. Really, I think my mom is the normal one. I'm the one who's super weird. But if you had asked me before we left on our trip, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? I would have hesitated for a moment and said oh, I don't know, maybe I could have lost my passport or got food poisoning or something like that. If you asked me that question today, I would not hesitate. Because the worst thing that could possibly have happened on our trip did happen the moment my mom purchased a selfie stick. I was honestly distraught. All in all, we had an amazing time together, my mom and I. And we had one moment on this trip that I will remember for the rest of my life. It is a very precious moment to me. We were in this fairy tale situation where we were in Venice in a gondola going down the streets surrounded by these enchanting things, and I looked over at my mom while we were sitting next to each other in that moment, and I thought to myself, I am so thankful that I am experiencing this moment with my mom as an adult. Because if I had been sharing that moment with her as an infant or a kid or even a high schooler, I think that what would have made that moment special for me was the fact that I was in this enchanting place, the fact that I was surrounded by all these enchanting things, that I was on an adventure. That would have been what made it special. But as an adult, I was able to appreciate what really made that moment special. And it was the fact that I was sharing it with my mom. That's what made that moment special. And you guys, a part of growing up spiritually means we shift from loving God for the things that He gives us to just loving God for who He is. And that's a huge part of our spiritual growth, is shifting from loving God for the things that He gives us to loving Him for who He is. And sometimes that means that the journey looks like you don't always feel His presence showing up. There's work being done in those moments where you don't feel Him showing up. And it's actually a sign of spiritual maturity if that is happening for you. Because it means you're ready to move on, to understanding what it looks like to love God for who He is. And so, today, we are talking about the relationship that you have with God. He desires to be with you. He does desire for you to feel His presence, to hear His voice, and to see His face. That's something He longs for. But it's not something that happens in an instant. Remember, infants have a lot to learn. They're processing a lot of information, and they don't understand it all at once. So we have a lot to learn. And I want to use the illustration of a garden to represent our relationship with the Lord. And we're going to be talking today about how we can take steps to bring growth to that garden. So I'm going to be talking about planting seeds of truth and removing obstacles to growth. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood in a really tragic way. I don't want anyone to leave this room thinking that the primary person who is responsible for growth in your garden with your relationship with God is you. The only person who can make that garden grow is God. And you guys, there are no obstacles whatever baggage you carry, whatever pain you felt, whatever scars you have that might be preventing growth, none of them are intimidating to God in any way. If God wants a garden to grow in the desert, it grows in the desert. I love this picture because this shows me that God gets what he wants. If he wants a flower to grow in the desert of your situation, it grows. That happens. Some people like to describe God as a gentleman, and I understand what they're getting at there. I think they're trying to say, God's not this tyrant who is trying to force you to love him. He's not a Casanova who's manipulating you into loving him. But if I'm being completely honest with you, I really do not like this analogy for God. And this is why. It gives me this idea that God is standing there just sort of casually and gentlemanly holding out his hand, saying, you could take my hand if you want it, or if you don't, if you need time, that's okay. I think that's a terrible representation of God. A much better one, my favorite one, comes from a poem called The Hound of Heaven. This portrays God as someone who is recklessly pursuing you, someone who is chasing you down, who is nipping at your heels until you give in to his love for you. He is patient, yes, but he's also strategic and relentless. I love that picture of God. So I want to replace the gentleman with a picture of God as a hound and remind you that if God wants a flower to grow in your garden of your relationship, it grows. It happens. But he does invite you to participate in the process of having growth in your garden of your relationship. He doesn't want you to just sit back and sort of wait for things to happen. He invites you to join in that process with him. And so again, we're going to be talking about ways that we can care for our garden. We can plant seeds, we can water our garden, and we can remove obstacles to growth. And in this first session, I'm going to be primarily focusing on removing obstacles to growth. And the way that I like to approach this is not necessarily with the Bible. I'm going to be talking about planting seeds of truth in the second session, and that's where we're going to take a passage of the Bible and we're going to go really deep into understanding what it's saying. But when it comes to removing obstacles of growth, this is actually the reason that I'm studying philosophy right now. I'm convinced that philosophy is an incredible tool to help people overcome obstacles to growth in the garden of their relationship with God. So there are three kinds of obstacles. We're going to call them rocks, weeds, and bad bugs. So the things that these represent, they're going to represent, rocks are going to represent false beliefs. So false beliefs that you hold, lies that you believe. We're going to look at how to remove those kinds of things. Second, harmful desires. Your heart guides what you do. And when your heart longs for things that are harmful to you, that's a problem. That's going to prevent growth in your garden. So we're going to talk about how to pull weeds, pull those harmful desires from your garden. And then third, we're going to talk about bad habits, bad bugs. When you have bad habits, even if you have the right desires, even if you know the truth, it can be hard to break habits that are ingrained in you already. So we're going to talk about overcoming those bad habits. And again, I'm going to be primarily giving you like a spiritual autobiography. I'm going to be sharing with you 3 sets of obstacles that have really been a prevention of growth in my life personally as I've walked with the Lord. And at the end of this time, I'm going to send you guys off to have a personal time with the Lord. And I want you guys to consider choosing one of these sets of obstacles to reflect on and to grow deeper. And there'll be a Bible passage that you'll be able to read that's going to attack the false belief. It's going to replace it with truth. So just be anticipating that that's a decision you're going to make when you have your personal time. You're going to choose one of these 3 obstacles. So the very first false belief that I have wrestled with in my life that has prevented growth in my garden is this one. You're worthless and you're alone. You guys, when we believe that, when our hearts struggle with believing that you're worthless and you're alone, it sort of puts you in this state of desperation. And that state of desperation can form a harmful desire in your heart. And it's a desire where you say, God, please prove this wrong. Please prove this wrong, but prove it my way. So the desire to have God prove it wrong is not bad. That's awesome. And it's a good thing that you're going to God to do that. But when you say prove it my way, that forms some really bad habits in your life. As I wrestled with the belief that maybe I was worthless or I was alone, I had this idea of how God could fix that for me. This was my idea. I just wanted him to give me a best friend. I was convinced that if he gave me a best friend, that I would believe that I was special to somebody, that I would truly believe that I wasn't alone. And you guys, every day that prayer, that request didn't come true, I assumed it was because I was doing something wrong. And so whenever I came before the Lord, I was expecting him to express disappointment in me. I was expecting him to say, you know, you want this friend? That's great. This is why I'm not giving it to you. And it made me have this bad habit. I had really selective hearing. I put this box around what I thought I was going to hear from God, and I waited until I heard something that fit inside my box. And you guys, when you put a box around what you're willing to hear from God, God does not honor it. God does not say, oh shoot, I need to make sure I say something that's in that box, otherwise she's not going to hear me. If God desires to tell you something that lies outside of your box, he's going to keep saying it to you. He's going to keep saying it to you until he's able to break down that box that you've put around what you're willing to hear from him. You guys, one of the first things I'm convinced infants learn to hear their parents say to them and actually understand in a meaningful way, 3 words. I love you. You guys, one moment when I was praying to God, I really said, you know what, God, I just want to hear you. I just want to hear your voice. And whatever you're going to say to me, whatever disappointment you want to express, I'm ready to hear it. I'm ready to hear it. And in that moment, God broke down my box, and he said the last thing I was expecting him to say. He said, Jerilyn, I love you. I love you. And you guys, as I went forward in my life, I learned the real reason that I didn't get that answer to my prayer right away. The real reason that when I asked for a friend, my friend didn't just show up right there. You see, when you pray to God, it's not like he just gets a text that says what your prayer is saying. God sees you in that moment. God sees you in that moment, and he sees everything that you need, everything that's going on in your heart, and he knows what it's going to take to give you what you long for. You guys, when I was praying for that best friend, I was not capable of having that friendship yet. There were other things that had happened in my life, other scars, that had made it so that even if that person was standing right next to me, I would not have trusted them enough to allow them to know me. I wouldn't have opened up to them. There were all kinds of things, all kinds of work that God needed to do, and it did take years. It was years later that I got the gift of a best friend. One of the tools that we have to overcome these obstacles is to trust God's methods. If the answer to your prayer is not coming right away, remember, he hears more than just the text of what you're saying. He sees you in that moment, and he knows what you need, and he's working. He is definitely working. But it might take some time before you see the evidence of that work. The other tool that's really helpful is to let go of your box. You guys, let go of the box you've put around what you're willing to hear from God. And that's easier said than done. I totally understand that. And someone who's really good at helping you with that is God. Ask God to help you let go of your box so that he can tell you what he really wants to say to you, so you can hear what I'm convinced he's been whispering in your ear for a long time. Let go of your box. All right, so that's the first obstacle. So if that hit home with you, When you have your personal time, I want to encourage you to choose that one. Go deeper with that one. The next one is this lie. It's only real if you can feel it. It's only real if you can feel it. God is only really there if you can feel his presence. God only really loves you if you feel like he loves you. You guys, this belief is a belief that has been developing in our culture for centuries, and a really big contributor to that development is philosophers. I could unpack for you why we currently believe this, and it has very little to do with personal facts. It has a lot to do with some really bad arguments for what reality is like, for what we can actually know. And so we believe this largely because of a product of our culture. And this forms a harmful desire in our hearts. It forms a desire for a charged, emotional experience. We're convinced that in order to grow closer to God, every time we come before him, we need to feel something really big. And I'm not saying that emotions and feelings are bad. If you've had a charged emotional experience with the Lord, that's awesome. But the reason that that's awesome is because of who God is, not because of the feelings themselves. Does that make sense? And so, longing for a charged emotional experience can lead to a bad habit. And it's the habit of manipulating your feelings. So when you come before him, you just want to feel something. You try to make those feelings happen. And you guys, that's not a great way to spend your time with the Lord. One of the best tools for overcoming this obstacle is the decision to preach truth to your heart. So when you're not feeling like God's there for you, when you're not feeling like he loves you, call up a friend and ask them to remind you of the things that he's done in your life. Ask them to preach the truth that he has done incredible things for you. He sent his son for you to die for you so that he can be in a relationship with you. He loves you. If you don't feel something, preach the truth to your heart. And that's not something that's inauthentic. That's something that's really, really good. It's a good thing to preach truth to your heart. And if you want to desire a specific feeling, if there's a feeling that you're longing for, this is the one that I would say is very good to desire. Very good to desire peace. Because peace is a lot more than a feeling. It's a lot weightier than a feeling. And when I have asked for peace, this is one of the things that God has most consistently given me when I have asked him for it. Desire peace in your life. You guys, your feelings are important. They're very important. And I don't want to suggest that you should smother them or ignore them or not acknowledge them in any way. But feelings are a lot like the wind. Feelings come and go. They're unpredictable. And if you allow yourself to be a boat without sails in the wind of your feelings, you're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to get tossed around randomly. We have to be really good at realizing how to respond to our feelings to empower us to get where we want to go. Respond to your feelings in strategic ways. Put sails on your boat. All right. The third obstacle that I want us to talk about is this one. This is a lie. The key to intimacy with the Lord, the key to experiencing his love for you, to feeling close to him, is time and effort. You gotta put in a lot of time, you gotta put in a lot of effort to make those feelings happen, to get that awareness of the fact that God loves you, to grow spiritually. And you guys, I want to take a lot of time to unpack this lie because I'm not saying that things like praying or reading your Bible are bad. Those are incredible things. Those are incredible tools for growing close to God. But if you think that your relationship with God, the depth of it, is going to perfectly correlate with the time and effort that you put in, that's going to be a harmful belief for you. And here's some reasons why. That forms some really unrealistic expectations in your heart. When I was in high school, I heard about this really incredible Christian. I wish I could remember his name. He woke up at 5 in the morning, every single morning, and spent 2 hours reading the Bible and praying. And on days when he knew he was going to be really busy, when he knew he was going to have a lot going on, he woke up at 4. He spent 3 hours praying and spending time with the Lord. And I remember being like, I want to be like that. I think my life will look so different if I spend 3 hours of time with the Lord every single morning. And you guys, that's actually true. Your life would look very different if you spend 3 hours of time with the Lord in the morning. And that's a beautiful goal to desire. But it is unrealistic to think that you can go from 0 minutes of reading your Bible and praying to 3 hours overnight. And these unrealistic expectations, I was like, I'm going to get up at 5. I am not a morning person. I'm not a morning person at all. So that didn't happen very often. And it created a bad habit for me. And this is the bad habit. Procrastination. I thought almost all the time that if I could just get through this busy season that I was having with the Lord, if I could just get through that, as soon as things lightened up, I was going to go to town on those 3 hours of the day. So one summer, I was like, I'm going to spend 8 hours of time reading my Bible and praying every single day as soon as the summer starts. It's going to be awesome. And I just got to get through finals right now. So, of course, during finals week, there wasn't a lot of time spent like that. And then summer comes. And there's a lot of pressure on that first day. There's a lot of pressure to have just incredible experience where I'm just going to muster up the discipline to spend 8 hours of time in prayer with the Lord. Some tools that we can use to overcome these lies, first of all, is to find the true key to experiencing intimacy with the Lord. It's actually not time and effort. And the second session is where we're going to go over the true key to experiencing that relational intimacy with the Lord. So that's going to be a focus in the second session, coming soon. Another really important thing that you can do is learn to take a baby step. So if you want to grow to a point where someday you wake up and you spend hours of time with the Lord in the morning, that's a beautiful desire. If you're at 0 right now, start with 15 minutes. Start with 15 minutes a day. That's a goal that's manageable. I love the truth that statistically it's been determined that we crazy overestimate what we can do in a day. Way overestimate what we can do in a day. But we way underestimate what we can do in a year. Crazy underestimate it. And so you guys, make an action plan. If you have a dream of what you want your time with the Lord to look like, and if it's something that is going to take a certain amount of discipline, make an action plan for getting there. Don't just try to muster up the discipline overnight to get there immediately. Remember, God is not interested in you as a final product. If he wanted to give you the discipline to spend 3 hours of time with him in the morning, immediately, with a snap of his fingers, he could do that. There's a reason that he doesn't. That reason is that he loves walking through that process of growth with you. And really important work gets done along the way. So learn to take a baby step. Identify, once we go from learning what the true key is, figure out a baby step that you can take each day. Take a baby step each day to grow in your relationship with the Lord. Now, in a little while, I'm going to dismiss you for your personal time with the Lord. And I want you to think about considering one of these sets of obstacles. And I'm just going to briefly go over them again before I dismiss you to see, I'm praying, that one of them will kind of hit home for you. And in your booklet that you got, there's sort of a guide to processing that obstacle with the Lord. So don't feel constricted by that booklet. If you just want to go to town reading some passages in the Bible and praying with the Lord, don't feel like you have to follow the guide. But if you want to, I'm hoping it will be a good resource for you. And you can pick one of those obstacles, and there's going to be a Bible passage first that's going to attack that false belief. It's going to say, this is not true, this is what is true, and this is how I know. Read this passage in the Bible. And then it's going to guide you through a process of praying to overcome those obstacles, to overcome the harmful desires that come with that false belief and the bad habits that come with that false belief, and process wrestling with that. We left off in our first session where we were wondering about what is the true key to intimacy with the Lord. What is the true key to increasing our awareness of the truth that He loves us and that we are in a relationship with Him, a friendship with Him. And so for this session, we're going to be unpacking a passage in the Bible that I think reveals the true key to intimacy with the Lord. And if you chose that obstacle for your personal time, then you might already have an idea of what the answer to that is. But before we dive into the passage, I also want to go back to the garden analogy that we were talking about, the analogy of the garden of your relationship with God. Remember that we talked about planting seeds of truth as something that was very important, and then we focused on removing obstacles to growth. So this session, I want to focus now on planting those seeds of truth. And the best way to do that, you guys, the best source of seeds of truth, I'm just convinced, is the Bible. The Bible is a book that gets hyped a lot, and it's not overrated. You guys, the Bible is a very powerful book. It has the power to transform your life. And that's why reading it is something that is so important. And I want to argue that it's really important to also make time to read it for yourself beyond just what you get when you come to church or when you go to a Bible study, but developing the habit of reading it every day for yourself. Because when you are exposed to the Bible in church, that's a wonderful thing. It's a very good thing. But something that can happen is you can grow to experience the Bible in sort of an atomistic way. What I mean by that is you experience the Bible in bits and pieces, and you miss the fact that the Bible is one big story. It is one big, beautiful story that God is telling us. And so if you really want to come to grasp that one big story, it's really important to dive into the Bible for yourself. And that can be kind of intimidating. That's why I say that's why we read the Bible. But answering the question of how to read the Bible can be a little bit intimidating because it's not like any other book. It's not like opening up Harry Potter and starting from page 1 and then getting to the end and you kind of know the story. It's a lot bigger than that, first of all, and there's a lot more going on. And so I want to challenge you to think not about how to read the Bible just when you sit down one time, but I want to cast vision that you would desire to learn how to read the Bible over your entire lifetime. Catch a vision for what it would look like to start reading the Bible every day today and to continue that throughout your whole life. That is going to be really cool because the way you read the Bible when you're first starting off is going to look a lot different than the way you read it when you have been reading it for years and when you have a deeper understanding of what's going on. So if you're here today and you don't have the habit or it's not a part of your daily life to be in the Bible, I don't want you to feel discouraged or ashamed of that at all. That's totally understandable. And I want to challenge you that as you start reading the Bible, if that's something that you would want to consider making a part of your daily life today, your goal when you read the Bible is not necessarily going to be to understand every single verse and to understand every single word, like the deepest meaning of what it is. What you want to do is you want to acquire a bird's eye view of what is going on in each book of the Bible. You want to be thinking, how does this book fit into the overall picture of what the Bible means? And that can be way less intimidating than feeling like you have to understand this really deep meaning of every single word. Does that make sense? So I just want to encourage you guys, if you're just starting off, that should be your first goal. And you don't necessarily want to start with the book of Genesis. That's the very first book in the Bible. That is not necessarily a bad place to start, but I want to say the best place to start is with Jesus. You guys, Jesus is the focal point of the entire big story of the Bible. Every single book of the Bible is pointing to Jesus. And so a really good book to start with, if you're just starting off, I would recommend the book of John. It's one of the 4 Gospels that are in the Bible, and this book, it demonstrates the fact that Jesus is God, and it walks us through that beautiful truth. And so that's one way of how to read your Bible. And as you get that big picture view, that's when, once you've mastered that, and that can take years, which is okay, that's totally fine. Once you've mastered that, that's when you're ready to start going way deeper on your own, to start diving into the deep significance meaning on your own. So as we read the Bible, I want to make a big distinction very, very clear. Understanding this distinction is going to make a really big difference as you read the Bible. The distinctions between what the Bible means and the significance of what the Bible means. Because what the Bible means does not change. It's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The Bible, what it means is what it meant to the very first ears that were hearing it. It's the same meaning for you today. But the significance of what the Bible means, that can change from person to person, from day to day. Me as a single person, verses that are about marriage, teachings that are about marriage are going to be significant to me in a way that is different than the way they're significant to somebody who is married, if that makes sense. So make sure you pay attention to this distinction, because oftentimes when we read the Bible, we want to jump to that significance before we understand the true meaning that doesn't change. So, 3 steps that you guys want to do when you come and you approach the Bible. One thing that makes reading the Bible a little bit challenging is the fact that you bring a lot of assumptions to the table. And that is just a product of the culture that you live in, the place where you grew up, your history, your gender. All these things make you bring assumptions to the table when you read the Bible, and those can lead you to sort of misunderstand what is being said. So what we really got to do is, first of all, identify your assumptions. Second of all, question them. And then third of all, correct your assumptions. Now, I want to tell you guys a story about when I was living with my grandparents one summer. I had just a really wonderful opportunity to spend the whole summer with them. And my grandparents live in a town called Ronan, Montana. And let me just tell you, Ronan, Montana is a very small town. And I'm not sure what the population is, but to give you an idea of how small it is, it does not have a Walmart or a Starbucks. So that was like my great trial of suffering during the summer. No Walmart, no Starbucks. It does have a sign as you drive in that says Bill's Shooting Range up ahead, turn left at the Dairy Queen. Like, that's the instructions. You would never see a sign like that in Los Angeles. That's where I live right now. It's like, turn left at the In-N-Out. Like, which one? There's 5 in the radius on this. One day, I was exploring a little bit, and it didn't take very long. There was not a lot to explore. But I found a thrift shop, which was awesome. But I went into this thrift shop, and I found this really beautiful antique wedding dress. And it was only like $10 or $20, something like that. And a little factoid about me that's kind of weird is I like to buy things for the daughter that I do not have for her to play with someday. So I bought like music boxes and lockets, and I wanted to buy this dress for her to play dress up in someday. So I bring the dress up to the counter to check it out, and the lady at the checkout, she's like, "Oh my goodness, are you getting married? Are you gonna like change this up to be like a little bit more vogue, a little bit more current? Like, I know people do that nowadays." I was like, "No, actually, I'm buying this dress for my daughter to play dress up in someday." She's like, "Oh my goodness, how old is your daughter right now?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have a daughter right now, but I'm hoping, someday." She's like, "Oh, well, how long have you and your husband been married?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I'm not married." And at this point, she's kind of like, "Huh." So she goes, "Are you engaged?" "No." "Are you living with somebody?" I was like, she's being pretty personal. I was like, "No, I'm actually not even dating anymore." I'm feeling like smaller and smaller and smaller. So she was just like, literally, this is verbatim what she said. "Oh, that's nice." So I bought the dress and like hurried out of there. But what I'm trying to show you is that she did something that was really good. She questioned her assumptions until she got to a true understanding of what was going on. Because she could have just left that place and gone on to tell the whole town that I was getting married, apparently on a budget because I was spending $20 on my wedding dress. But assumptions, they're going to play a big role when you're reading the Bible, and you definitely want to consider them closely. So what I'm going to have us do is I'm going to have us look at actually a pretty big chunk of John 15. Normally, when you're trying to go really deep in a passage, I would recommend choosing a chunk of scripture that's a little bit smaller than this, more like a paragraph instead of 3. But I really want us to dive deep into the whole argument of this section of John. So I'm hoping you guys can hang in there with me today, because I promise it will pay off when we get to that 3rd paragraph, that's going to be really powerful for our understanding. But when I first started reading the Bible for myself, I went around to a ton of people, and I said, hey, what's your favorite passage in the Bible? Because I wanted to get to the good stuff first. And I had a lot of people tell me that John 15 was their very favorite passage of the Bible. So I think this was when I was in junior high, and I went, curled up on my couch, I'm opening up John 15, and I had really big expectations that it's going to be awesome. And what happened is John 15 stressed me out like none other. I was like, why is this people's favorite passage in the Bible? I cannot understand. Something is either wrong with them or it's wrong with me. So I want to kind of give you an idea of what was going through my head. I put in bold the verses that really stressed me out. So we're going to read that together from a junior high Jerilyn perspective. So, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. Great, I'm okay with that. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit, so they will produce even more. So you're telling me if I'm not given a fruit factory, I'm going to get chopped off from Jesus, and if I'm a good fruit factory, I'm going to get parts of myself chopped off, so that I become an even better fruit factory. I'm going to have to perform really well. That sounds awful. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be faithful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Now we're going to get back to feeling a little stressed out. Prepare yourselves. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. That's terrifying. Just stop and acknowledge that. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want and it will be granted. So some people are like, that's awesome. God says you can ask for anything you want and it will be granted. But I was thinking to myself, I ask for things all the time. They're not granted. That must mean that I'm not remaining in him. I'm not doing a good job. Apparently something is wrong. Let's keep going. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, I already read that. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. So again, I'm like, how much fruit is enough fruit? Feeling really stressed about producing fruit. This brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you, even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. And now we come to what I consider to be the most stressful verse of the entire passage. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. So I'm really stressed out by this passage, and now I feel like a loser because I'm supposed to be joyful about it, and I'm not. It's very stressful for me. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. So I want us to challenge those assumptions that were really stressing me out. I want us to identify them and sort of unpack them. And one of the best ways to do that is to get a really good grasp of the context in which this is being taught. You want to identify the audience. You want to identify who Jesus was talking to, because that's going to be a really big key in understanding what the true meaning of the passage is, because it's going to mean the same thing it meant to them for us. And then second, you want to identify the time frame. So what was happening before this passage was read? What's about to happen afterwards? What is going on surrounding this teaching? And then third, you want to identify parallels. So these are parts of the passage, maybe it's a word, maybe it's an analogy, a picture, that we want to see if they're used in other places in the Bible, because maybe if we can understand what they mean there, we can have a better understanding of what it means here. So, let's go back to our passage. Now remember that I said that the big goal of John is to portray Jesus as God. So when we see the words I am, we should just stop right there. Those two words have incredible significance because John has 7 different I am sentences in his book. So I am blank, I am blank. That happens 7 different times in the book of John. And the reason that's so appropriate is because way back in the day, when Moses, a man named Moses, first met God, he was in a culture where there were tons of gods. So he said, they thought there were tons of gods. So he was like, well, what should I call you? What should I tell other people is your name? And this is the name that God responded and gave for himself. He said, I am that I am. So in John, when we see the words I am, immediately that should send up a flag that says this passage is supposed to point out something about the fact that Jesus is God. So let's keep that in mind. I am the true grapevine. So that word true is doing some work in the passage. That must mean that there's some other grapevine that they would have been thinking about, and Jesus is saying he's replacing that grapevine. He is the true grapevine. And for the disciples, I didn't mention, he's talking to his disciples at this time. The disciples would have immediately understood the grapevine to represent Israel. Now, Israel is the nation of God's chosen people. And really quick, I want us to go back to understanding who the audience is that we're talking to here. So Jesus is talking to his closest disciples. And his closest disciples, they were all Jewish people, which meant that they were part of the nation of Israel. And really quickly, I want you guys to understand what was going on for the Jewish people when Jesus showed up on the scene. You see, God made a promise to the nation of Israel that was part conditional, part unconditional. He said, if you keep my laws, if you obey my commandments, and you follow no God other than me, then I will bless you. I will make you a mighty nation, and there will be a mighty king on your throne. That was the conditional part. The unconditional part was that that kingdom that God was just describing, that kingdom would last forever. So you guys, at first, the nation of Israel, they rocked it. They were the most powerful nation in the entire world. Everyone respected them. They had victory over all of their enemies because they were God's chosen people. But remember, that promise had a conditional statement. And they were not very good at following God's laws. And they served all kinds of other quote-unquote gods. And so God withheld his blessing from them, and they were defeated by their enemies, and the nation essentially fell apart. They were scattered. And I really want you guys to understand that they had this reasoning. They're like, well, this kingdom is going to last forever. That was unconditional. So that must mean that there is a king in our future. We are waiting for the return of the king. And the way that we're going to get that to happen is by being really good at following God's laws. And so the religious leaders of the time, they took it upon themselves to make sure everybody was doing a really good job at following God's laws. And so just imagine how much pressure it would be if you were living in a culture where your mistakes didn't affect only you, they affected your entire community, because when you made a mistake, you were delaying the return of the king. That's a lot of pressure to obey the law. That's a whole different level of pressure than I think we understand when we try to be good people. So when the disciples hear the true grapevine, they immediately hear that Jesus is saying, I'm replacing Israel as the true grapevine. So immediately they're like, I wonder what's going on. And my Father is the gardener. Now verse 2 would not have surprised them. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. That would have made sense to them. They would have been like, yeah, the people who are like failing at this game, let's get rid of them. They're preventing the return of the king. Like, chop them off, do whatever it takes to get us to obey the law, because we want our king back. We want to be that mighty nation again. So the 2 would not have stressed them out. It would have just been like, yeah, no duh, that makes sense. Verse 3, you have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Stop, you guys, and think about what that verse implies. When he says you've already been pruned and purified, that means they have already produced fruit. They do not have to be concerned about whether or not they're the kind of branch that is producing fruit. He's saying it's already happened. You've already been pruned and purified. So that stress that I was feeling about being a fruit factory, for everyone who's made a decision to follow what Jesus has said, to be a part of his family, to thank him for what he's done and to trust him, you already have fruit produced in your life by that message. You don't have to stress about whether or not you're the kind of branch that is producing fruit. It's happening already. So just remember that. All right, verses 4 and 5 are really cool because they're actually repeating each other. Whenever the Bible repeats itself, that's an emphasis that it's really important what's being said. So remain in me and I will remain in you. And there's actually versions of this verse that drop the will because it kind of sounds like, if you remain in me, then I will remain in you. So you kind of have to earn me as remaining in you. But when you drop the will, it reads more like that command is something Jesus is giving both to his disciples and to himself. He's saying, remain in me and I in you. So it is so important that you remain in me, and it is so important that I remain in you, and here's why. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. Repeatedly, he's telling them, apart from me, you can do nothing. You cannot produce fruit all on your own. Now remember that pressure that I was talking about. Imagine what a relief it would be to hear, hey, that thing that you're trying really hard to do, you actually can't do it on your own. You're trying really, really hard and you're failing repeatedly, and that actually makes sense because you're not capable of doing it in the first place. We all, I think, I'm willing to bet, that we all have some part of our body that we're a little bit self-conscious about. I wanted to share that part of myself that is true for me. All growing up, I've been really, really self-conscious about the fact that I walk like a duck. So my feet are turned really far out, and when I'm walking, it's not like that obvious, but you guys, when I run, it looks ridiculous. I look like a penguin that's like trying to waddle, but kind of failing at it at a like quick speed, like speed up. And all growing up, I've had my parents tell me this, I've had gym teachers tell me this, they've been like, Jerilyn, just point your feet in. Like, all you have to do is just point them in. And I just felt like this loser because I always forget to point them in. And so I learned something that kind of solved the problem for me. I learned that when I wore heels, that it like corrected it on its own. I didn't have to think about turning them in. So I wore heels all throughout college, all throughout high school, every day. Like, I didn't have to worry about my stupid duck feet, and I felt more confident. Now recently, I met somebody who was a personal trainer, and I sort of told them about this insecurity that I have about myself, and they're like, oh, it's not ever going to fix it if you just keep trying to turn your feet in. That is not going to succeed in anything. He said, your muscles are out of balance, so somebody needs to come and help you and teach you different muscles that will exercises that will reorient your muscles so that they're readjusted to be back in. And this might not sound like a big deal to you guys, but like, that was awesome for me to hear. That like I wasn't this idiot who's just like, everyone else is good at pointing their feet in and I'm just a failure in that area and I can't do it. I learned that I couldn't do it on my own, I needed help. Now that relief that I felt would have been minuscule compared to what they would have been feeling in this moment. They were under this gigantic boulder every single day, trying so hard to keep the laws, so hard to be perfect people, and every time they dropped that boulder, every time they made a mistake, it was so shameful and so embarrassing because it had costs for the entire community. And Jesus is coming along and he's saying, hey, you can't do it on your own. You can't carry that boulder. You need my help. You need me to help you carry it. That would have been so encouraging to them. So now, verse 6, this is going on to emphasize how important remaining in Jesus is. It's saying that Jesus is the only true source of life. He is the only true source of life, so that if you don't remain in him, death is going to result. That is just going to happen. And this is a truth that we should be aware of. As scary as that verse sounds, It's important that we recognize that Jesus is the only true source of life. Now, it says, but if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want, and it will be granted. Let's stop and figure out what's going on there, because we all know that we ask for things that are not granted sometimes. I think we're aware of that. So is Jesus lying in this passage? Like, what is happening there? And we can understand what's happening here by realizing what would have been the first thing to come to mind for the disciples when they heard this. The first thing on their mind would have been succeeding at being those holy people, being able to keep that law, not being ashamed of doing something that is shameful to the rest of the community. It would have been, Jesus, make me holy, make me pure. That would have been the first thing that they longed. Help me to produce fruit. You guys want to think about an example where someone were to come up to you and were to be like, hey, we've got something to eat tonight. I can make chicken, I can make steak, pizza, spaghetti, like what do you want to eat? And if you say, oh, you know what, I'll eat anything. In that context, it's talking about the pizza, the chicken, and the steak, something edible. You're not saying, oh, I will eat worms, or I will eat cardboard, or I will eat dirt. So this verse is very similar, where the context of that anything is applying to the fruit. And that makes sense with verse, when we move on to the next verse, where it says that when you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples, and this brings great glory to my Father. Jesus delights, God delights in answering requests for fruit and answering requests for holiness, and he will grant them because it brings him great glory. All right, so hang in there with me. This is like the most important part of this passage. It says, I have loved you. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Guys, that verse, it brings me to tears because I've spent a lot of time thinking about the Trinity. The Trinity is a word that we use for the truth that God is one God in three people. You guys, the love that the Trinity shared for one another was so perfect, was so beautiful, and it's something that has been going on for all eternity past. So when Jesus says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me, that's a really big deal. It's a really big love that he has for you. He says, remain in me, remain in my love. And then he explains what it means to remain in my love. He says, when you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. Now for the old vine, you had to remain the old commandments, the old laws. But Jesus' commandments are different. Jesus' commandments are all about love. They're all about love. Look at verse 12. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. And the same way that he has loved us is the way that the Father loves him. That is a huge love. That is a huge call to action. And so we got to recognize that that is something that we cannot do by ourselves. We cannot obey by ourselves. So it's almost like we're in this catch-22, where Jesus is saying, in order to remain in me, you have to obey my commandments, you have to love in this really big way. And then in order to do that, we need to remain in him. It's this back and forth. We need to understand that those go hand in hand. That God has changed our motivation for obeying him. It's no longer to be good enough. It's no longer to earn the right to be a part of his family. Now it's to experience that love that he has for us. That remain means that it's already set in stone. God already loves you. So when you remain, you're choosing to experience that love that he has for you. And that's where verse 11 makes sense. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. So you guys, I'm going to tell you today that the true key to experiencing intimacy with the Lord is obedience. It is understanding what God wants you to do and taking a step of trusting him and an action step of obeying him. But it's not something that you do in order to be good enough. Remember, he says, that's already done. I've already pruned you with the message that I have for you. It's already a done deal. You guys, I recently had one of my close friends do some things that were really, really hurtful to me. And I wasn't just a victim in the situation. I definitely made my own mistakes as well. But they were really, really hurtful. And it just happened recently. And I am so glad that I was studying this passage in preparation for today while that happened. Because every time that my heart went to wanting to be bitter towards that person, every time I was like, I just want to make them pay for what they did, I just want them to hurt the way that I hurt, I want to get back at them, I cried out to God. And I said, God, please help me. Help me to love this person. Help me to forgive them in my heart. And you guys, every time that happened, there was this response where God helped to transform my heart. And he helped me realize that the only thing I needed to put effort into was calling out to him, was going to him for help. You don't need to put effort into making your heart perfect. You don't need to put effort into this own form of love. You need to put effort into depending on him. That's it. And he does the rest. So this is a huge transformation in the way that we obey, in the motivation that we have to obey. And as I did that, my obstacle, that big issue of pain in my heart, that instance where my friend had really hurt me, it transformed from something that was just pain and was just hurt, and it became something that was an opportunity to draw closer to God. Every single day, that was on my mind repeatedly. And that's my prayer for you, that these areas of pain in your life, whether it be an addiction, whether it be a broken relationship, whether it be financial stress, that these things would be transformed from just a difficult situation into an opportunity to draw closer to God by taking steps of obedience that demonstrate your trust in him. And that's the key to experiencing that relational love, to feeling his close presence. Now, really quick, before I sort of wrap up and send us on to the next thing, I want to tell you something that a lot of Christians have experienced before we wrap up focusing on the garden of our relationship with God. There's a lot of Christians who have experienced God's presence, feeling God's presence when they first became Christians, and then as they grew to follow God, they had this feeling like all of a sudden he was really far away. There's a lot of people who have experienced that. And so it's possible that is either in your future or that's something that you're experiencing right now. And you guys, what's going on in that moment is God is actually drawing even closer to you. And remember, I talked about before that we want to transition from loving God for what he gives us to loving God just for who he is. And that process of that feeling that distance is a part of that transformation. So I just want to encourage you, if you're in that place today, that work is being done, progress is being made. So I'm going to go ahead and transition to our next thing, but before I do that, I just want to pray for us to wrap up today. Lord, I just thank you and praise you that you gave us the Bible, that you gave us your word, and that it has the power to transform us, Lord. I just ask that you would continue to use it to speak truth to our hearts, Father. And as we consider this passage that we dove into today, Lord, I ask that you would help us to understand a true motivation for wanting to obey you, Father. That we're not earning anything, we're not performing, we're not being fruit factories, we're not trying to make ourselves good enough for you, Lord. But we draw close to you in those moments when we take a step to obey you, Lord. I just ask that everything that you've done here today, that this would spill over into the rest of the week, Father, and that you would continue to do great work in our hearts. We praise you and we thank you so much. Amen.